He just tried to launch a patriotic sports festival and accidentally wrote a live action Hunger Games trailer instead. Trump is calling it the Patriot Games, a 4-day made T4 television showdown, where one boy and one girl from every state and U.S. territory are flown in to compete as part of his Freedom 250 birthday celebration for America. Democrats took one look at that casting choice and immediately dropped the meme hammer, cutting together Hunger Games clips and President Snow images, like they'd been waiting years for this exact moment. So let's talk about what this really is. Not just a goofy branding idea, but a very deliberate state-sponsored spectacle that tells you a lot about how power, image, and patriotism work in Trump's America at 250 years. Here's how it's supposed to work. On paper. In the fall, the White House hosts the first ever Patriot Games, an unprecedented 4-day athletic event, featuring what Trump calls the greatest high school athletes in the country, with precisely one young man and one young woman from each state and territory. That's 100-plus hand-picked teenagers, wearing their state colors, flown to Washington as tributes to a central arena that's being branded as a unifying national moment. Wrap that in television rights, sponsorships, and non-stop campaign-style coverage, and you have a hybrid of a sports tournament, a political convention, and a reality show. From a systems perspective, this is classic: centralize attention, attach it to youth, and frame it as wholesome patriotism that just happens to be personally hosted by the president in an election cycle. The Democrats' reaction wasn't just snark, it was diagnosis. When the official party account posts a Hunger Games clip sui, complete with the line about each district, offering one young man and one young woman in tribute sudi, they're not only mocking the optics, they're flagging the architecture, centralized selection, symbolic tributes from each region. A national broadcast built around competition among the young under a strongman's brand. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker didn't even bother with subtlety. He posted the image of President Snow, the fictional autocrat who uses televised games to glamorize obedience and disguise brutality. Whether or not Trump intends anything that dark, the aesthetic he's chosen is doing a lot of the work for his critics. When your core mechanic is one boy and one girl from every state fighting for glory in a central arena, you're inviting the comparison. Zoom out and look at where this sits inside the broader Freedom 250 ecosystem. This isn't a standalone stunt. It's part of a full slate that includes a great American state fair, massive fireworks, a national prayer gathering on the Mall, a new Triumphal arch in Washington, and a UFC event on the south lawn of the White House. Think about that as an integrated design. You get the agricultural nostalgia of a state fair, the militarized feel of fireworks and parades, the religious imagery of a national prayer rededication, a permanent monument modeled on the Arc de Triomphe, and a cage-fighting event, literally on the president's lawn. From an engineering mindset, you'd say the system is overdetermined. Every element is tuned to send the same signal: strength, spectacle, combat, piety, and permanent victory, all under a single personal brand. The Triumphal Arch idea is especially telling. Trump is openly saying the U.S. is the only major place without a triumphal arch, and that he wants one, like in Paris, explicitly invoking the Arc de Triomphe as a model. Historically, triumphal arches are not neutral architecture. They're about conquest, military glory, and the state's claim to history. When you pair that with Patriot Games and a UFC event on the South Lawn on Flag Day 30, which also happens to be his birthday 30, you're not just planning a party, you're fusing political office, national identity, and one man's personal mythology into a 250-year story. The UFC card is being pitched as the greatest champion fighters in the world, all fighting the same night on White House grounds, hosted by Dana White. That's not a random booking. That's a deliberate decision to make literal combat the centerpiece of the People's House on a national symbol day. Now, from a purely game design standpoint, Patriot Games has some clever elements. By limiting each state and territory to one male and one female athlete, you guarantee geographic representation and gender balance in a way that looks inclusive on the surface. Every governor gets a stake. Every local news outlet gets a hometown hero to feature. Every participant's family becomes an invested audience. If you wanted to maximize emotional buying per M in use of airtime, this is a good way to do it. But as soon as you introduce the language of tributes, even accidentally, you also introduce the question, who is doing the choosing, and for whom are they really performing? Are these kids competing for their communities, or are they props in a larger political broadcast, framed as national unity, while the country is deeply polarized? The Democrats are leaning hard into the idea that Patriot Games isn't just cringe. It's dangerous. By pairing Trump's announcement with Hunger Games clips, they're suggesting a continuum between spectacle and authoritarianism. First, you normalize the idea of young people as symbolic tributes under a leader's gaze. Then you normalize using national celebrations as tools of control, rather than shared civic rituals. In their framing, Trump is playing President Snow with better lighting and fewer honest villains, turning what could have been a straightforward sports festival into a test balloon for how much state team-managed pageantry people will accept. And because the event is timed around the 250th birthday, a moment when a lot of people feel nostalgic or patriotic by default, fitui, it becomes an emotional vulnerability in the system. You wrap power in nostalgia, and people drop their firewalls. At the same time, Trump's team can sippy and will sip and argue that this is all wildly overblown. They'll say, it's sports, not war. It's kids running track, not kids in an arena. Criticism is just elites mocking patriotism again. They'll point to things like the Olympics, the old Goodwill Games, or even high school, all-star events, and ask why this is different. The answer lives in the who, where, and when. This isn't the USOC. It's the White House. It's not neutral ground. It's the Capitol. And it's not an ordinary year. It's the 250th anniversary, framed by a president who has already been pushing the boundary between campaign rallies and official events for years. When the same administration that is renaming cultural institutions after Trump, threatening foreign land strikes, and staging UFC bouts at the White House, also announces a youth games format that mirrors a famous dystopia, people are going to see a pattern. Another under-discussed piece here is the administrative machinery behind Patriot Games. The event is being folded into Freedom 250, described as a national, nonpartisan organization that's leading the administration's celebration of America's 250th birthday. That label Sufi, nonpartisan partisan, is doing a lot of work. In practice, you have a White House-aligned structure curating which stories about America's past are amplified, which symbols are built into physical reality, and which faces foodi, in this case, photogenic teenagers, in Team Girsu, become the human interface for the project. If you think like a systems engineer, Freedom 250 is a content pipeline. Patriot Games is one of its highest died bandwidth outputs. Young bodies in motion, flags, scoreboards, cheering crowds, all shot in 4K. Once you have that pipeline, you can splice it into campaign ads, fundraising reels, and legacy documentaries whenever you want. And then there's the religion layer. Part of Freedom 250 is a national prayer gathering on the National Mall that Trump says will rededicate our country as one nation under God, with a very explicit line that we're not changing, that despite unnamed people, he claims want to remove it. Now line that up, a national prayer rededication, a triumphal arch, a combat sports, spectacle, a youth games tournament, and fireworks over Washington. This isn't just patriotism, it's liturgy. It's an attempt to sacralize a particular vision of America at 250, one where the state, the leader, the military, and religion are all visually braided together. For people who already worry about creeping Christian nationalism or the erosion of church-state separation, Patriot Games isn't just a sports story. It's another piece of an ideological operating system being installed one fun event at a time. Will it work? That's the real question, from a pure attention economy perspective. Yes, the media is already hooked. You've got global news writing about the announcement, entertainment outlets asking if he just greenlit a real-life Hunger Games, governors dunking with memes, and social platforms slicing the clip into every format imaginable. Trump understands that outrage and mockery still equal distribution. Every time someone tweets, "This is literally Hunger Games," they're also spreading the phrase Patriot Games and reinforcing the idea that he is the central host of America's 250th birthday party. In a fragmented media landscape, being the one person everyone is talking about FID, even negatively thandy, is a feature, not a bug. The risk is that the symbolism gets away from him. Once the Hunger Games narrative sticks, every shot of kids in matching uniforms on a national stage becomes ambiguous. Is this inspiring or creepy? Is this a celebration of youth or a subtle demonstration of control? Memes have long half-lives. 10 years from now, if someone clips Patriot Games footage next to President Snow and Katniss again, it will still feel coherent, because the basic pattern is baked into how people first encountered the idea. When you're building systems, you worry about initial conditions. The initial condition here is, this looks like a dystopian story we already know. That's not something you can patch later with better branding. So where does that leave ordinary people watching this from the outside? You don't have to accept either extreme setting. It's just a fun sports day, or it's literally Panem. The more useful frame is to ask, what jobs does this event perform for the people in charge? It rallies base voters who love visible patriotism. It tests how far the White House can go in turning national events into personal stages. It gamifies youth participation in a way that feels flattering and aspirational, while centralizing credit in one office. It seeds footage that can be repurposed for years. And it normalizes the idea that the president personally curates the nation's biggest rituals. That's the system's view. If you made it this far, here's the question to sit with. When a government starts designing national celebrations that look suspiciously like the opening scenes of a dystopian franchise, is that just bad aesthetics? Or is it an early warning about how that government thinks about people? Siding, especially young people, Sandy as characters in its show. Because in the long run, the issue isn't just whether Patriot Games is cringe or cool. It's whether you're comfortable letting any president of any party turn the country's 250th birthday into a 4-day audition for who gets to be a tribute in their story. If you want more breakdowns like this SETI, where we pull apart the spectacle, the incentives, and the underlying code running underneath these political stunts, hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me this: are Patriot Games just harmless flag-waving? Future. We've already been warned about in fiction.